All right, so ready for a deep dive. We're tackling a big one, the self. Like, what does it even mean to be a you?
It's a question that's haunted philosophers for centuries, but now with neuroscience, we can actually start to explore it in some really fascinating ways.
And that's where our guide for this deep dive comes in Thomas Metzinger. In his book, Being No One, he throws out this radical idea. The self, that feeling of you that we all have, well, it's not what we usually think.
Right, it's not this separate, unchanging soul-like thing, as tempting as that might be to believe.
It's more like a HODL, a
Yeah.
simulation built by, you guessed it, your brain.
Exactly. And to grasp this, we have to accept something kind of mind-blowing. We don't experience the world directly at all.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Elaborate on that a little.
Everything you perceive as reality, it's actually your brain's best guess, a constructed model based on all that sensory information it's getting.
So when I look at, say, this notebook right here,
Yeah,
I'm not actually seeing the notebook itself, but my brain's version of it.
you got it. Your brain takes the light, the shapes, the colors, and through this amazingly complex process, creates its representation.
And most of the time, that representation is accurate enough for us to, pick the notebook up right in it,
Mm-hmm.
interact with the real one.
Precisely. It's so seamless, we just assume it's direct experience.
So it's like our brains are running this virtual reality program 24/7,
Mm-hmm.
and we're so good at it, so immersed, we have no clue it's a simulation.
That's a great way to put it.
But then, how does something as simple as the color blue, or like the warmth from my coffee cup, how do those feel so real? If it's all just our brains cooking up information, why doesn't it feel fake?
That's where phenomenal presentation comes into play. It's the process by which the brain transforms basic sensory data into those qualities of
The
experience.
qualities of experience.
Think of it this way. Your brain doesn't just register wavelengths of light reflecting off, let's say, that blue mug. Instead, it presents you with the actual experience of blueness.
Ah, I see. So there's this extra layer, this leap from raw data to something we actually experience and find meaningful.
Exactly. And that editing, that transformation is happening constantly, completely outside of our awareness.
And it's not just limited to like our five senses, right? I mean, think about daydreaming.
Perfect example.
You're creating images, feelings, whole scenarios, all simulations your brain is generating. It's like even when you're not directly engaged with the world, your brain is still busy building and tweaking these models.
Always at work.
That's wild. So that whole phenomenal presentation thing, this constant state of simulation, it's like the ultimate magic trick. We don't see how it's done, just the illusion itself.
And it's a powerful one, an illusion that in many ways makes us who we are. But like any good magic trick, there are these little glitches that reveal how it all works.
Glitches, huh?
Hmm.
You say my brain's going to start like freezing and crashing like an old computer.
More like, think about those times when you suddenly notice the strangeness of your senses. Like, wait, is that really how I experience the world?
Okay, I kind of see where you're going with this.
Yeah, Metzinger uses these odd cases, these glitches in perception, to highlight how our brains build this whole reality, this self, and how complex, how adaptable the whole thing really is.
All right, you've definitely got my attention. Hit me with an example.
Okay, so have you ever heard of prosopagnosia?
Espresso what now?
It's also called face blindness.
Face blindness. Oh, wow. Honestly, that sounds kind of terrifying. Can you imagine?
It can be very isolating, absolutely. Surrounded by faces, but not able to recognize them, even loved ones.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah.
But how does that connect back to, the self being this constructed thing?
Here's where it gets interesting. So people with prosopagnosia, they can often still recognize other things about the person. Their voice, the way they walk, even their clothes.
Really?
They might know who someone is, but the brain can't link that knowledge to what they're seeing in the face.
Wow. So there's this disconnect then. They know this person, but their face doesn't match up, I guess.
Exactly. It's like knowing someone's story, but then passing them on the street and not recognizing them at all.
It's making me realize, like, how many different things must be going on in the brain just to recognize another person, let alone our own experience of being a self.
Absolutely. It's not a single thing, this self. Prosopagnosia is a good example of how the brain is a network, all these processes working together, and when one piece malfunctions, well, we see the cracks in the illusion.
So face blindness shows us this gap between what we know and what we recognize visually. What other glitches can you tell us about?
How about this? Imagine being able to dodge obstacles. You can even catch a ball thrown at you, all while being completely blind.
Wait, what? Is that real?
It's a real phenomenon called blindsight.
Blindsight.
Yeah.
So how's that even possible?
So with blindsight, there's damage to the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes visual information consciously.
Okay.
And here's the wild part, even though they can't consciously see, they still react to things in their visual field.
So on some level,
Yeah.
some part of their brain is still seeing, but they have zero awareness of it. It's kind of creepy, honestly. Like, what else is my brain doing that I have no idea about?
Right. It really challenges our understanding of what we think we know about, well, consciousness. Like, if so much is happening under the hood without our awareness guiding our actions, what does that say about our conscious experience?
Whoa. Okay, yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
So we've got the brain creating this model of reality. Sometimes it's incomplete, like with face blindness,
Yeah.
or it's straight up contradicting our conscious experience, like you just said with blindsight.
Yeah.
Anything else that can happen when these models get a little wonky?
Sometimes the brain, in its attempt to make sense of things, it invents.
Invents what? Like hallucinations. I know those can be caused by certain medications or, yeah, I mean.
Right. And there's this fascinating example, really relevant to the idea of the self, called Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Okay, tell me more.
People with this syndrome, they're visually impaired and they start having these really vivid hallucinations, even though they know they're not real.
So their brains are basically filling in the blanks, making stuff up to compensate. That's kind of amazing.
It is. It highlights how active the brain is. Think about it, if your brain's used to a certain amount of visual input, and then it's suddenly reduced, it doesn't just stop there. It tries to create a world that makes sense, even if it has to invent things.
Okay, wow. Prosopagnosia, blindsight, hallucinations.
Yeah.
Brains are wild. Here I was thinking I was just passively observing the world, not actively constructing it.
It really is a humbling realization. But all of this, these glitches, they're clues. They point to how the brain builds this sense of self. And at the center of it all, this thing Metzinger calls the phenomenal self model, or PSM.
Okay, yeah, we've been dancing around this PSM thing. Lay it on me.
Uh-huh.
What is so the PSM? It's like my brain's own personal user manual for being me.
It's more like your brain's ongoing simulation of what it means to be you.
Okay, so not just a static picture, more like a
It's dynamic. Think about it. How many versions of you are there, even in a single day? You're confident at work, maybe you let loose with friends, then you're introspective when you're alone. The PSM pulls all those experiences together.
That's wild. But if it's all this simulation, why does it feel so real? Like so deeply me?
Yeah.
I don't walk around analyzing myself. Oh, there's my PSM in action.
That's because it has a few key features that make it so convincing. For
Yeah.
one thing, it's centered around you. Your unique perspective is what it simulates.
Okay.
And there's this strong sense of ownership, that mindness over your thoughts, feelings, even your body.
Mindness. Yeah. You don't usually think about ownership with like your own mind. It's not like I possess my thoughts the way I do this coffee cup.
Right.
But they do feel like they're inherently mine.
Exactly. And importantly, the PSM is transparent. You don't experience it as a model. You experience the model itself as your reality. Just like, remember, we talked about with the senses. We don't walk around experiencing wavelengths of light. We experience the sunset.
Right, right. So we're tricked, basically. We're so caught up in the movie that we forget there's a screen, a projector, a whole system that makes it work.
Exactly. But just like with those glitches we discussed earlier, sometimes there are these little cracks in the illusion.
And when it comes to the self, those cracks can be pretty fascinating, right?
That's
A little unsettling even. So where do we start to see these cracks, these glimpses behind the curtain?
Well, we've talked about how the brain can create experiences that feel totally real, even if they're not based in, actual physical reality.
Hallucinations, yeah.
Right. But what happens when the brain holds onto a model, even when the physical evidence contradicts it, like with phantom limbs?
Oh, right. When someone loses a limb, but they still feel sensations, even pain, where it used to be.
And it's not just a fleeting thing. It can last for years, decades even, after the limb is gone.
Wow.
It really shows how strong that brain's model of the body is, that feeling of mindness we talked about. It persists even when the information says, nope, not there anymore.
That makes you wonder then, how much of our sense of self, of our own bodies, is this flexible, adaptable model our brain has created? If it can be convinced a phantom limb is real, what else is it capable of?
It really throws a wrench into those old ideas of a fixed, unchanging self, doesn't it? And it gets even more complex when we think about cases like dissociative identity disorder, DIID.
Did he? That's when someone has multiple personalities, right? Like different identities, different memories even.
It's very complex and often misunderstood, but one way to think about it through this PSM lens is that there's been a kind of fragmentation of that usually unified self. It's like there are multiple models running.
So instead of one movie, their brain is playing like multiple films at once. That's going to be incredibly disorienting.
It can be extremely challenging, absolutely. But it offers this unique window into just how flexible the self can be.
Man, we've gone from the brain creating one model of reality to the possibility of multiple selves coexisting. This is definitely making me question everything I thought I knew about who I am.
And if that weren't enough, there's another piece to this puzzle, Dreams.
You're telling me my brain's simulating even when I'm asleep?
No rest for the weary, right? Think about it. In your dreams, you experience a world, you have emotions, a sense of self, and none of it is tethered to what we think of as the physical world.
It's true, and sometimes those dreams feel so real. I wake up and it's like,
Hmm.
did that actually happen? Especially those lucid dreams when you realize you're in a dream. It's like your mind is suddenly awake inside the simulation.
Exactly. It's like catching the brain in the act. Lucid dreaming reveals this amazing capacity to not only create, but potentially even become aware of its own simulations. Makes you wonder, what else is our brain doing that we don't even realize?
Well, this whole deep dive has been one big mind-blown moment for me. Yeah. So, to recap, Metzinger argues that our sense of self, maybe even our experience of reality, full stop, it might just be this incredibly elaborate illusion, a simulation our brains have gotten really, really good at running.
It's a radical concept, and it has big implications for how we understand, well, everything, really, from how we see the world to consciousness, even free will.
It's almost comforting in a weird way to know my brain is working this hard all the time, even if it means reality is a little more fluid than I thought. Definitely gives you a lot to think about. So, listeners, as you go about your day, consider this. How much of what you're experiencing, what you believe, who you are, is really just your brain, this amazing simulator doing its thing? And if it's this powerful, what other mysteries are still hidden within us, just waiting to be explored?